Okay, Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas season at any rate to all of you. And making it very Christmassy for us are Jacqueline M., John J., Ben C., and Jimmy, uh, Jimmy C. Guys, thank you. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for your kindness, thinking of us all this time and much more than in just the Christmas season. This is so appreciated that you're keeping us paid for, shall we say. So, and a Merry Christmas to you guys in particular, okay? Yesterday or so, a couple days ago, no, it's more than that now, Chris, oh no, actually this came yesterday or today. Following up on your experience with mirrors, we talked about Leonardo and the use of mirrors. Here's an interesting quote I found in Da Vinci. I haven't worked with mirrors yet. And this is Chris speaking, Chris C. But on the heels of it, he gives me, and this is what he sent along with him. So this is from a book that he's reading on Leonardo. And these are quotes. So I'm just going to read this for you in full. And this was the culmination of a lifelong preoccupation with the science and mystery of mirrors. You talk about experiments with, as you can see above there, with concave, et cetera, et cetera. Representing his thoughts from almost 20 years earlier, the posthumously compiled Libro de Pintura records this advice to young painters. When you wish to see whether your whole picture accords with what you have portrayed from nature, take a mirror and reflect the actual object in it. Compare what's reflected with your painting and carefully consider whether both likenesses of the subject correspond, particularly in regard to the mirror. And then again, according to Leonardo, the painter should be a mirror which is transformed into as many colors as are placed before it. And in doing this, he will seem to be a second nature. And my guys, Chris included, or in particular, was chasing down this idea of what he means by a second nature. It doesn't, I don't think in any way, by the way, you guys will pick this up another day, but he doesn't mean second nature in the same way as we say, you're training yourself in such a way that you will do, for example, relational seeing will become second nature to you. That's meaning a developed instinct or a similitude of an instinct. But rather, I think he seems to be saying that it will be so nature itself, seen as if it were flat, as if it were in a mirror, will be second nature to you. But will actually be nature, but a second version of it. You can sort these things out. Everybody, anytime you're this far away, Gamble used to from another painter, from a master painter, it's far-fetched to believe you know precisely what any of this stuff means. And yet there are usefulnesses to it that we've all found by listening to it and thinking it through. And then when you're working along, you suddenly will find yourself finding a place where it applies to something. So in that way, anyway, we're just going to go pick on Leonardo a little bit. I don't mean pick on him, actually. I mean to borrow from him. I'm just going to narrow this down. I hope this is the last one for a while on Leonardo, but it's not really about Leonardo. It's about getting objectivity, which is a subject that he talks about. Then the mirror is a very big deal with that. But I just want to point out a few things I've discovered with having pursued that from young, the idea of using mirrors, how to use mirrors, what they're good for. I just wanted to sort of unpack it here, just sort of isolate that as a subject, and which we haven't done anywhere. We've talked about it, but we haven't, done anything sort of this extensive. So I hope you can get some enjoyment out of this. When you see in this first quote here, when you see whether, I'm going to take this away. Well, Mr. Producer will have already taken this away. Thank you, Mr. Producer, for being ahead of me on this kind of stuff. Which reminds me to tell you that we are doing a live stream on the 29th. Mr. Producer wants me to get that in early and often. And I believe 1 o'clock our time. That's Eastern Standard Time in the United States. So Degas says you need to learn to be objective to your work. So how to judge of one's own work. It's acknowledged It's an acknowledged fact, Leonardo talking now, that we perceive errors in the works of others more readily than in our own. A painter, therefore, ought to be well instructed in perspective and acquire a perfect knowledge of the dimensions of the human body. He should also be a good architect, at least as far as concerns the outward shape of buildings, with their different parts. And where he is deficient, he ought not to neglect taking drawings from nature. Now, that doesn't in the least imply that we are drawing out of our head. He's talking about checking your work, okay? Getting objectivity about your work. If you know something about perspective, you'll be able to see if your work is funny. All right? Now, if you're an impressionist, you're not painting with perspective drawings in front of you. You haven't projected them onto the canvas. You're painting directly, exactly what you see, and you're playing that naive eye roll of what angles do to each other, what colors do to each other, blah, 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 in that whole relationship world while watching the thing as a whole. So one of the things, though, about Leonardo that gets clearer and clearer, though, is that and that his particular value continues into Impressionism. And you're going to see why immediately here. He says it will also be well also to have a looking glass by him when he paints, to look often at his work in it, which, being seen in the contrary way, will appear as the work of another hand. There again, that's objectivity. I found it's even better to, when you're working, to not be taking credit for what you're doing. Just watch what your hands are doing. You set the mission before you, which is making the beauty of that likeness as it is. And by the way, that's all we're talking about is Impressionism, minimally, at least for now. And that is we're representing the magic, the beauty, the truth of the relationships and of the grand impression. And so it begins to be rather a simple, in one sense, a simpler problem than some other kinds of problems that happen in the world of painting. So having it from the beginning, not to have it be precious to you, your darlings, all that sort of expression. Think of yourself in your hands, in a sense, as that what's going on out there, and keep your mind objective to it. So that's a mentality, but there are other things we're talking about here that are also hugely important. So the looking glass is one of them, though. It'll show your faults, but how does it show your faults, and what way does it do it? So it'll be useful also to quit his work often and take some relaxation. Now, everybody knows about that. Just walk away from what you're doing and come back and you'll start seeing the crazinesses. I used to find that I would always have an opinion about my work. But I'd leave at the end of the day. It was bad or it was good. That was the only opinion I had. It was tragic or it was magnificent. And I'd come back the next day and it would be exactly the opposite of whatever I thought. So if I thought it was brilliant, all I could see was false. And so if I left thinking it was horrible, I'd come back being very pleasantly surprised. It was never horrible. Very strange, So, but I found it better to not live in those emotional roller coasters, and in fact, rather just try to stay a little sober. And I do like that one writer who says just whatever he's doing, he says as soon as he puts down his writing, he doesn't think about it anymore. He just puts it down. The next day he comes back. I like that for us. I used to sit there and look at my work for a long time, so I even get to the degree of being sick about it. You probably heard me say this before. All right, but it's still, nevertheless, it's useful to quit his work often. That's a lot of trips to the water fountain. Don't stand there laboring and laboring and laboring and laboring. Frequently get away so you can come back with this refreshed eye, right? You become the fresh guy with the fresh eye, to quote one of Gamel's axioms. And take some relaxation. I used to recommend people go and sit down and read a murder mystery or something. You've probably heard me say that. That his judgment may be clearer at his return, for too great application and sitting still is sometimes the cause of many gross errors. Couldn't agree more, and I have been a victim of all of those. So this whole idea of objectivity, freshening up the eye and all that sort of thing, and in my case, I'm saying also consider being an objective witness to your own work from the beginning, Just keep some distance from it. That doesn't mean you won't be trying with all your heart, soul, mind, whatever, to express the beauty and the magic of what's in front of you. But that maintaining your distance about and being objective to the relationships, the truth of the relationships. Well, this whole thing is going to be interesting when Leonardo starts talking further about the mirror. So here we go. In what manner the mirror is the true master of painters? There you go. When you wish to know if your picture be like the object you mean to represent, have a flat looking glass. That's a mirror. And he's saying that don't have a convex one. We've looked through all those. There's a reducing lens and all those sorts of things. They can serve some very brief purpose. And I found that's true of a lot of things, including the mirror. The purpose isn't something that's going to be continuously great for you. Although he says have a flat looking glass, place it so as to reflect the object you have imitated, and carefully compare the original with the copy. Now you'd have to do this sanely, you'd have to have the mirror reflecting both. So we would have behind us in the studio a big mirror standing on the floor that you could wheel around. And it would be in such a position that you could see both your painting and nature at the same time. And the reason is because if you're looking through a stained glass, whether you like it or not, the mirror is almost never, and it's always affected by a color. Leonardo talks at some length about colored glass. And mirrors are like that. They have a coloring or the silvering stuff itself, et cetera, et cetera. That's whatever causes the reflections. You'll inevitably find there's something greener or something about the colors. But if they're both changing in the same way, that'll make a difference. But he really isn't talking about the colors. Let me get on with this. You see upon a flat mirror the representations of things which appear real. Painting is the same. Painting is the representation of something that appears real. Now, if you stopped right there and said nothing else, we're talking about the idea of perceiving things as if they were already painted, as if they were flat, seeing as if it were already flat, and making that a reflexive, making that automatic, instinctive, making it second nature. That you see things as if they were already flat. The mirror will help you with that, okay? By the way, and with my eyes, zooming in wasn't going to do anything good for me. I couldn't make, I don't have, zooming isn't one of those things that nearsighted people do much. We find ourselves looking across the screen at the relationship. So we have a benefit there, you guys who may not be so. But the guys who can zoom in are so used to doing that. I had a student once say that she would never be able to do it because her eyes were different from mine and all that sort of thing. And that is going to create an additional difficulty. We've talked about that. Anyway, painting is the same. They are both, I don't know what that means by that. That's something wrong with that quote. They're both and even superficies. But but I would say, if we could say nothing else, we could say they're even surfaces, and both give the idea of something beyond their surfaces. Since you're persuaded that the looking glass by means of lines and shades, that line, by the way, I'm very sorry I didn't pick up on that on the early side. I've read this before, but this may be a translation thing. And keep remembering that whatever I'm giving you here, there are translators involved. And I think that the book that Chris was referring to was actually had Italian, a lot of Italian references. So I suspect that the author was a scholar with Italian, that could read Italian and was giving even his own translations, much as Gamble did with French. But since you're persuaded that the looking glass, by means of lines and shades, gives you the representation of things as if they were real, you begin possession of colors which in their different lights and shades are stronger than those of the looking glass, may certainly, if you employ the rules with judgment, give to your picture the same appearance of nature as you admire in the looking glass. Now, what I'm going to say to you at this point is that one of those things is very clear, can be very clear, no matter how much the glass mutes your image. It can create great clarity about the value relationships and the effects of light effects. That is, say, the relationships of the effects of light in a picture. And again, that's one of the products of seeing things as if we're already a two-dimensional flatness. You can see that even looking at me. There's things that are going to be strikingly more brilliant than other things by their effects. And you should be able to get that whole field of those things into your vision so that you're grasping which are top and which are second and which are whatever, in the order of those things, if you want to call it that. That's significantly what I call the visual order. Or rather, your picture will be like nature itself, seen in a large looking glass. So he's saying again that the value of this thing is significantly in seeing your painting as if it were the looking glass, both of them being this flat world, right? Okay. Now, there's one other point I believe he wants to make, but that's the first one that I find giving you some kind of a value that you might not expect. You can look through a piece of glass, though, and get some of the same benefit. if you do it, if you put a piece of glass there, even when it's slightly smeared, so actually you become aware of the glass itself, then looking through the glass at nature, it makes it a little bit easier. It's mostly a mental thing eventually, right, that you become good at, become second nature, if you want to call it that. And that is that you start seeing the stuff as if it were the marks, the colors, the shapes, the whatever, as if they were marks on a plane, right? Which is why DeCamp says don't look past the picture plane. Okay. This looking glass, being your master, will show you the lights and shades of any object, whatever. So amongst your colors, there are some lighter than the lightest part of your model, and also some darker than the strongest shades, from which it follows that you ought to represent nature as seen in your looking glass. When you look at it with one eye only, by the way, and because both eyes surround the objects too much, so make them. So again, he's still talking about the idea of reducing it to a less three-dimensional problem. So it's a lot of this is about mentality. You use this in the best way you can. One of the things we did when I was a student was, among the other things we tried, we looked at nature. We would put a mirror up. I think the way I did it was put a mirror up so I would be able to look at nature, or even this way. So nature would be in front of me, but the mirror would be over here, so I could look back between the mirror and nature. That was when I learned that the colors are way different from each other, and that's something you might want to consider. So is there a use to doing that? I never found that you actually could get much use out of trying to get your drawing better. But you could find your back stragglers sometimes more readily. And I do think that when you came into the room, as Leonardo said, that sort of fresh eye you get from using a mirror or something like that, there's going to be an instinct that you're just not on track. And I think that's as good a benefit as you're ever going to get from these things. That's the way to use a lot of your information, a lot of your, just looking at the thing big and glancing at your painting. That's the Meldrum conversation. Get them to look like they just merge into each other. Other relationships so right that the thing would just begin to be of a piece with the other one, the painting and nature. While we're doing this, I'm just going to go down and look at Leonardo just for a second. These are his works. The guy is definitely, look at the painting, this thing down the left here is a study of a copse of trees. And it's clearly done from something more like it's very impressionistic, reminding me very much of the Velázquez landscape, the couple that he did, that we know of, that I know of. But you can see the impressionist mindset. The fact that he's painting, his instructions to us come so significantly from looking at nature. That's the impressionist mindset. Let's look. Let's not have looked a little and just make pictures. Now, as much as one of you was upset with me, and I'm never the enemy of Rubens, but there's a making pictures thing that dominates in lots of painters, and the impressionist is entitled to be dominated by the looking. Leonardo is very beneficial to us when we are the lookers, the impressionists. Other guys might be better, Rubens included, if you're just trying to make up a world of your own and I say not just, it's just that world is what it is. But to do for illustrative unity and that sort of thing, the Riley method, things like that. But I wanted to just mention something. On the left is Holbein, who's after Leonardo, but the other two painters on the right, this is where I give the Dutch so much credit. They were studying nature already. I just have never seen much writing like Leonardo's. Now, if some of you guys from over there have got writing by a Van der Weyden or a Campen, I think it's Robert Campen, if you've got something like that, boy, put it out to us. It'd be fun to see. But I have not seen much, including, Otto Grunman from the Boston School guy. There's no book associated with him. There's no body of work that's associated with the thinking that was coming out of Antwerp. So, but you can see by just looking at these three how fully imbued these guys were with pursuing the truth of nature, as you were, the representational realism, whatever word I don't happen to like much. And of course, it's always been an orientation to be able to make a thing more like nature, meaning that. But the Dutch were already onto this like 50 years before. I believe these two paintings are both from the 1450s, or so, which was about when Leonardo was born. And we know that his use of oil comes from the northern countries. Holbein isn't Dutch. Holbein is German, by the way. I just don't mean to confuse anybody. Or to underexpress my appreciation of all cultures out there. But let's just go back, though, to these multiple points. I just wanted to make sure you understand the way I'm walking through this. So it's very evident in the Leonardo quotes that he's talking about the study of nature. That's what he's talking about. He's talking about that piece of our work when you're making a likeness of something right in front of you. And it's, frankly, as it were, impressionistically, the way he's talking. And that's useful to impressionists. And then he makes those Meldrum-like, he puts the emphasis on getting these two things, the mirror image and the nature image, to look the same. And that's the Meldrum conversation about merging the two and being able to merge the two images to be able to paint your thing well enough so you can see how they just appear to be very much the same thing. Now, it won't be literal merging when we can't hit certain kinds of color notes and stuff like that, but there'll be relational merging. And that way, it's very easy to like Leonardo, because when he's talking about effects, he's talking about values much more than colors. And it's a reason why we rely on values more so, right? You have to be really good in your values. Color is, I don't agree that color is just some icing on the cake. Color has its own. Look at Leonardo, look at Degas or Veronese, and you know the color, and lots of other painters. The color is so much more than just frosting. Color has its own. It's one of the players, one of the musical instruments, right, in our symphony. But then then my point number 4 is this whole idea of flatness and seeing flat, and he's putting his time all the way through that whole thing. How do you get yourself to get out of the 3D mindset and see the thing as if we're already a painting? This is just a review of the things I've already told you. And then this idea of objectivity, the mirror would ideally add a layer of objectivity and make visual effects and impressionism primary, painting the look of nature in front of you. Even his use of discussion of perspective is to make a thing more truthful to what's in front of you, So, so the only things I ever have run into, I haven't found, I think there are a couple of things, but I haven't found the mirror to be a complete, your complete teacher, COMPLEAT. I've never found that it's that. I found that for most students, a ruler with marks on it, so you can, when you've done your work, much like with perspective, you can hold a ruler up and note, or even just a piece of paper, and note points along a line, and make sure your stuff lines up on those points. Linear locations is just as dramatically important. On the other hand, if you're a visual painter, the idea of being able to just reflect on your image as a whole, which he virtually mentions, I don't know if he says as a whole, but he's saying your whole, yes, he does. He says your whole, the painting of your whole object or whatever, or the whole object of your painting. But there is that thing that's dominating over everything. Genius lies in seeing the thing as a whole is the, as you've already heard from me, that's the Reynolds quote. Which is, how much of this is all these guys, who are they, who else do they have to listen to besides Leonardo, Of course, besides their teacher right before them and all that sort of thing, lots of painting, like other fields, is handed down in ways that don't have, written conversation about that. How many people have even written books on sports? There's more people now than ever before, but even now, you have a great coach or a couple great coaches or a previous performer that you gain so much from. Pay attention to your fellow students if they're doing something well. But don't try to use it for things that it can't be used for. You can't, to use it in a careful, close way. It's much more useful in a big way, in the grand sense of the big impression. It's much more useful that way. I've had students who tried to correct drawing problems using the mirror, literally. But you really don't correct drawing problems so vicariously. The mirror will tell you where they are, and you're going to have to go out there and do your job. It's a lot easier to work in nature, but it's specifically a lot easier, though, if you've learned the benefit of, shall we say, of seeing through a mirror and grasping flatness. you're going to make your corrections way more savvy-like, so with way more sophistication. And let's see. So I've noticed that, and I've been that student where you try to use it for something it can't be used for. There's so many things in painting that, so many areas of our experience where we're trying to apply something, overly apply, use it where it can't be used. So knowing the limitations of any aphorism or axiom or tool is so important. Much like timing, and knowing which kind of drawing you're doing today, so you're not always doing a noodling copy when your point is to come up with an out of your imagination thumbnail of a pose, knowing the difference. All right. Yeah, it's up to you, Mr. Producer. You might be just as well put these up there, but these are just some thoughts I threw out to Chris in this conversation. Those of us with my finger gets long on the S's for some reason. I think it's these computers, which is why it's axiomatic to always be aware to look for the one trick that spitballs you over the home plate of life without getting hit. Well, I say that over and over again. There is no single trick. In a sense, there are a lot of tricks, but Gamble would use word like dodges. I said dodge. That's an older term, maybe a Victorian era term, but ways around something, that sort of thing. But there are many things to learn, and there are key aspects to each of them, if you want to call those tricks or whatever. But use the mirror as you can, and if you find it specifically beneficial in some unusual way, I'd be interested in hearing about it, and so would others. So, and on that happy note, I'm going to leave you. I want to thank you all for your kind contributions today. You guys at the top of my list of the Jacqueline M, John J, Ben C, and Sonia D. I'm sorry, Jimmy C. You know who you are. I really want to thank you, of course, as always, and so many of you now that have been set yourselves up to give us regular benefits, regular contributions, because it really does keep us going. And we are, as I said, we're not making profits. I'm not here to do that. I'm here to actually get the conversation out there. More out there, right? This conversation. I don't want to talk about that kind of painting, this kind of painting. I want to talk about how to make this kind of painting that we're doing. I don't want to talk about comparisons and that sort of thing. I don't want to talk about modern art. You know me. But I want to be a benefit to those people who are struggling to make the impressionist painting or the likeness, the loving the world in front of them, want to make, and just keep remembering, no matter what I say, I'm so fully the Boston School thinker. I mean, I'm working from that platform, even though I'm not selling that as the thing, the be all end all and all that sort of thing. So, but in any case, yes, thank you all. Keep commenting, keep donating, keep subscribing. Get your subscriber people, get people to subscribe. It really does help, we're finding. And to like is helpful. So keep it coming. And I think I should wish you a Merry Christmas. We are going to do that on the 29th. Mr. Producer, who's going to be out of town as of tomorrow, he will be back, and we will be doing a live stream. And with some guests, probably, by the look of it. And hopefully, certainly. And we're looking forward to seeing you guys there. It'll be a lot of fun to do it if you're back in town or whatever, between the holidays, before the new year. Heading into next year. I was thinking about even with conversation with Mr. Producer, having a conversation about going forward, the idea of going forward. What is this field going forward? I'd love to have you all maybe think about that and put some thought into where is painting? Where are we going? What are you doing personally what is forward to you? Forward going meaning, again, into the next year and the next years and the next generation, et cetera, in painting. Okay, just thoughts. In the meantime, I wish you all a very wonderful Christmas time with your families and wherever you are. And from whatever culture you come, it's very pleasing to have you aboard and and I wish you the very best. See you next time.